do to those, or say about those people. Zachary Cohen, we know you'll be watching it. Thanks so much. And joining me now, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Tom Dupree and CNN legal analyst and former White House ethics czar Norm Eisen. Norm investigated Trump as counsel for the House Judiciary Committee in the first impeachment trial of Donald Trump and litigated cases involving him previously. He's also the editor of the book Trying Trump, a guide to his first election interference criminal trial. Great to have you both. Norm, let's start first with you. You have been in the courtroom for this trial, which has been probably quite interesting. You described it as there being electricity surging through the courtroom when Hope Hicks was testifying on Friday. Do you consider her the most compelling witness so far?
She was perhaps the most dramatic, Jessica, but in some ways, the most compelling witness so far was David Pecker, the former publisher of the National Enquirer, because Pecker took us inside the most important issue for this case, Trump's intent. Did he have the intent to commit another crime and then to cover it up with these 34 allegedly false documents? And Pecker said he and Michael Cohen and Trump agreed at a 2015 meeting at Trump Tower that that was what they would do. They would benefit the campaign through these secret payments. If that's true, that's a campaign and election conspiracy, which is half of the prosecutor's case. So Pecker and Hicks, both extremely important.
And Tom, part of Hicks' testimony focused on how Trump was more worried about how his wife Melania would perceive this Wall Street Journal story about his alleged affair with Stormy Daniels. And she testified, quote, "He wanted me to make sure that the newspapers weren't delivered to his residence that morning." Do you think that she threw the defense a lifeline here, that they're going to argue and have been arguing, look, he was just trying to defend himself personally at home with his wife?
Absolutely. I think there's no doubt that when it comes time for closing arguments, the defense team is going to circle back to her testimony on exactly that point. To be fair, she did talk a lot about this mixed motive, that obviously President Trump, candidate Trump, was concerned what would happen politically if the Stormy Daniels story broke before the election. But to your point, she also testified that Trump was worried about what his wife would think, and went so far, I'm kind of almost a quaint effort to conceal the knowledge from her by preventing the newspapers from being delivered to their apartment in Trump Tower. I suspect the defense was writing furiously as she was testifying, and that we are going to see that theme recur throughout this trial, including in the closing, when they say that Trump was acting not so much to protect his election interests, but rather to keep all of this sordid business from his wife.
Yeah, what do you think, Norm? I saw you nodding your head while Tom was talking.
As a matter of law, if the prosecution can show that Trump had a mixed motive, but he would not have made these payments but for the campaign, legally, the judge is going to instruct the jury that's enough to establish the intent to commit a crime. Then you have the phony documents, you have the cover-up, guilty if you find beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, the other evidence that the prosecution wants also came in through Hicks, because she also testified that she did not believe some of what Donald Trump told her, and that he made some admissions like, isn't it better that this came in now after the campaign than during the campaign? So there was ammunition for both sides, but that's the controlling legal issue, Jessica.
And Tom, Trump's defense attorney tried to get Hicks to show that Michael Cohen acted on his own, that he wasn't part of the campaign. Do you think that was effective, that it worked for Trump's team?
You know, if they want to press that argument for the jury, I think they're going to need a little bit more. They clearly were angling for that road. I don't think Hope Hicks quite gave them what they were hoping to get. In fact, at one point, she said she found it very doubtful that Michael Cohen would act for purely charitable motives, that just wasn't his nature. So I think the defense team will continue pounding on that theme. But if they want the jury to agree with that line of argument, I think they're going to have to get more. Look, Hope Hicks' testimony on balance, I think, had something for both sides. From the defense perspective, they're going to try to find these little things to plant seeds of reasonable doubt with the jury. But on that particular point about, well, you know, she was only doing this or he was only doing this for different purposes, I think they're going to need a little more than what Hope Hicks gave them.
And Norm, we heard Zach kind of walking us through what the prosecution's been doing in preparing the jury for Michael Cohen, who really sits at the center of this case in so many ways. How do you think they're going to continue to do that? And do you think it'll work if you keep saying to the jury, listen, we know he has a lot of knocks against him, but we still feel like you need to hear from him?
Well, I lived through that because when I was hired by the House of Representatives to do the impeachment, the first impeachment of Donald Trump, Michael Cohen was the first witness I talked to. I took the train to New York. I expected one thing, but I'll tell you, Jessica, what I got from Cohen was something very different. Yes, he's had a very checkered history when he was associated with Donald Trump. I found him to be very persuasive, that he broke with Trump, that he's attempting to do the right thing. He's colorful, to be sure, but this is a very New York jury. We were talking on the break. One of the great things about being in court, of course, I've been going to court for over 3 decades, usually trying the cases, not watching them, is watching that jury. It's a real group of New Yorkers. I think, like before a political debate where they try to lower expectations, prosecution's lowering expectations, Michael Cohen is very likely going to exceed them, and I think he will present well to this jury. But boy, it's going to be a tough cross-examination for the ages.
For sure, for sure. And it's always about, right, expectations of people. Tom, I want to ask you about one of Trump's other cases. Tonight, Nathan Wade, the former special prosecutor in Georgia's election interference case against Trump and others, just talked about how he resigned from that case after the scrutiny over his romantic relationship with the district attorney, Fani Willis. I want to play a clip of what he said.
Workplace romances are as American as apple pie. It happens to everyone. But it happened to the two of us. I regret that private matter became the focal point of this very important prosecution.
Tom, should he be surprised that something like that became the focal point when they're going after the former president, who's known for trying to delay and get at anything he can, pull at any string he can to get out of prosecution? What do you make of Nathan Wade's comments right there?
Absolutely. He should have realized something like this would happen. Look, this was an egregious self-inflicted error by Mr. Wade, by Fani Willis. To me, it is absolutely incomprehensible. They thought that somehow this would be perceived by the American public as he said, American as apple pie. Absolutely not. Prosecutors have a high responsibility to avoid the appearance of impropriety. And what happened here was just an egregious error of judgment on behalf of the Georgia prosecutors. And I don't think Mr. Wade or Ms. Willis have anyone to blame in this whole sorry episode other than themselves.
All right. Norm, quickly, reaction to that?
I agree with Tom. It was not smart. Wade had to go. That was clear from the start. There's nothing all-American about having these kinds of workplace relationships.
Yeah. All right. Norm Eisen and Tom Dupree, I appreciate both of you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hundreds of people